Englishness, fair play, cricket, hills, countryside.
I think it's sort of right with the thing that they don't really expose feelings.
I've always been suspicious of ideologies because we can't agree on one.
It's not just about 2 world wars and a World Cup. A lot of our freedoms have been pushed forward by what I'd always call the English radical movement.
England is a mongrel country, full of every kind of everyone.
Just what is Englishness? It's an often asked question, as England struggles on with a post-empire identity. High levels of immigration and a diverse population mean that some people think Englishness has been lost, but is it even something we can define? Kate Fox, author of Watching the English, an anthropological study of the English character, came to the conclusion that our defining traits are our restraint in social situations and a love of and reliance on humour. 70 years ago in 1941, George Orwell wrote an essay called The Lion and the Unicorn, Socialism and the English Genius, and in it he described Englishness as somehow bound up with solid breakfasts and gloomy Sundays, smoky towns and winding roads, green fields and red pillar boxes. And before that, Napoleon famously called England a nation of shopkeepers. Some may see us as stiff and restrained, buttoned up in a tight-fitting suit, while others imagine us as loud and violent football hooligans wrapped in a beer-soaked St George's flag. To begin my study, I took to the streets of Sheffield to see what images Englishness conjured up in people's minds there.
Rain, bad weather.
Pubs. I don't know, I think that's a pretty typical English thing, is why the pub's at the centre of a community. That doesn't really happen in most other countries.
Denmark.
Yes.
Hi. So as a Dane, what springs to mind?
We do see a lot of Monty Python and Mr. Bean, that's what we sort of see. So I think we think of them as very like stiff and proper people. I think it's sort of right with the thing that they don't really expose feelings as much. You know, they rather sort of, instead of just raging out, they rather just say, oh, it's all right.
The Queen, yeah, love her. She's good for business, isn't she? Multiculturalism, I think. And tea.
Means almost nothing. It needn't mean anything. England is a mongrel country, full of every kind of everyone. Englishness, I don't know what, salted butter, maybe. If you want to talk about Englishness and it having a meaning, you better go and talk to Nick Griffin.
English is just pretty much every country from the world in one place.
When I think of England, I tend to think of narrow-minded patriotism, nationalism more than, it's not really patriotism, it is nationalism. When I think of Great Britain, I think of like the multiculturalness of it.
So one of the first problems I'd encountered was separating Britishness from Englishness. Is there a difference? Even for those of us who live in England, it can sometimes be hard to say whether we're British or English. Great Britain is quite a muddled composition of countries and political ideas, and some might say that's rather English in itself. Dermot McCulloch is a professor of history of the church at Oxford and presenter of the BBC TV series How God Made the English. He gave me a historical perspective on the difference between Britishness and Englishness.
Well, Britishness is an invention. Of course, all nationalities are inventions. But Britishness is a comparatively recent one. You could date it at best to 1603, more likely 1707. And it was there for a particular purpose, which was to unite really the English and the Scots. But the Protestant English and the Protestant Scots wanted a common myth to bring them together. And as it happened, it was also a myth which was at the basis of an empire which, to everyone's astonishment, became a world empire. I think for recent arrival communities, Britishness may be an identity which they will prefer. My own partner comes from Gujarati Hindu diaspora, and he's not interested in being English, but he is very interested and very happy with being British, because Englishness has had this awful taint of the National Front and so on. It's been monopolised as an identity by some very unpleasant and undesirable people.
So Britishness is perhaps more of an artificial invention than Englishness, and gives some unity to the different pieces of land and culture that make up Great Britain. As Dermot says, it could also be a more desirable identity than Englishness. But now we've separated those two, let's get back to defining Englishness. Dermot explained how England's storied religious history has helped shape our national character today.
Church of England never got a monopoly, not just not on religion generally, but just on Protestantism as well. Most Protestant countries, the established church managed to keep a virtual monopoly on the identity. England didn't, because the free churches developed. I think that is very important on the English personality in establishing untidiness and plurality as natural and national virtues. I've always been suspicious of ideologies because we can't agree on one.
That rejection of ideology is a recurring theme when it comes to Englishness. And Dermot touched on another important trait when he described for me his idea of Englishness.
I'm rather old-fashioned. I grew up in the 1950s, and the great phrase then, self-congratulatory phrase, was muddling through. You basically endure lots of cock-ups and inefficiencies to get a result. I still think that's not a bad image, that through untidiness, through plurality, through experiment, through live and let live, and neglecting ideology, you achieve a much more civilized, tolerant, acceptable, pleasant society than you otherwise would.
The ideas of community consensus, tolerance and plurality are another set of themes that seem to crop up in conversations of Englishness. Some would say plurality and multiculturalism are defining characteristics of the English today, while other groups, such as the English Defence League, argue that multiculturalism has gone too far in this country, leaving ethnically English people feeling marginalised and ashamed of their nationality. Julian is a trustee from the Steadfast Trust. They're a charity that seek to promote the education, legal rights, welfare and overall interests of the ethnically English community. And here's how they do that.
Everything from supporting community events, I think we give about £10,000 now to the Stone Cross St George's Day March, which we think is important, even down to individual grants for, we've given a grant out to a young girl who got picked to go to a London stage school but couldn't afford it, basically. I mean, it's often brought up how important it is for other communities, to have a strong sense and a positive idea of where they've come from and who they are. It's not often brought up that, that also includes English children. People see it as quite refreshing that there is a charity out there.
And what does Julian think the best things about England's history and heritage are?
It's not just about 2 world wars and a World Cup. A lot of our freedoms have been pushed forward by what I'd always call the English radical movement, which dates back to the sort of peasants' revolt and moves on through the levellers, the diggers, the suffragettes, the trade union movement. They didn't want to conform to what the government said. They stood up for themselves and they had a different point of view, and they weren't prepared to be lectured to about what they should do and what they shouldn't do. These are things which have pushed forward, everything from Magna Carta through to the Bill of Rights. I think we're losing that. I think English people should understand, they've got a long history of radical thought and action. And it's something a lot of people these days wouldn't associate with Englishness.
Again, we're hearing about our tendency towards a rejection of ideology and a movement for change through community consensus. Now, the Steadfast Trust come at Englishness from a purely ethnic standpoint, but as multiculturalism continues to spread across England, it's becoming harder to separate what is ethnically English from that isn't.
My mother was half English, and I'm half English too. I'm a great big bundle of culture, tied up in the red, white and blue.
That's Billy Bragg, and he pays tribute to England's diversity in his song, England Half English. Over music that sounds rather English, but in the modern multicultural sense, Bragg points out how much of our current society and culture isn't actually native to this land.
My breakfast was half English, and so am I, I had a plate of Marmite soldiers, washed down with a cappuccino. And I had a veggie curry about once a week. The next day I fry up with bubble and squeak, 'cause my appetite's half English, and I'm half English too.
Bragg goes on to sing about everything from Morrissey to Morris dancing, which gave me an idea. There was a Morris dancing event taking place in Sheffield city centre, so I went down to have a look and speak to some of the people involved. First I had a chat with Derek Schofield, editor of English Dance and Song magazine. What does he think is particularly English about Morris dancing?
Basically it's an amateur activity. It's people doing it themselves. It's community based. When it's when it works best. I think it's community-based, it's local people doing it, it's amateur in the best sense of the word, or sometimes some of it is in the worst sense of the word.
Again, we've returned to the theme of community, especially when you consider that Morris dancing traditionally centred around that great English community hub, of course, the pub. But I wanted to know how Morris dancing is received in foreign countries. Here's Jilly Brunner, a Morris dancer from all-female group Pexatan.
First time we went abroad, we went to Stuttgart in Germany. Huge TV coverage, massive screens in the street, a great experience. Different countries do really appreciate different international dance cultures and see it as being just another really interesting quirk of another country and what they do. So it goes down well. Probably better than it does here, let's face it. For whatever reason, maybe English people don't appreciate their own culture. As a nation, we've always hooked onto other cultures, and we've been a country that's particularly embraced other cultures and enjoyed other things. So you get R&B influences, or you get all sorts of different types of music that come from all over the world, and we really like that. But for some reason, we seem to have slightly shunned our own, that's been here all along.
It's easy to see how the influx of foreign cultures hasn't left much room for traditional English activities, like Morris dancing. But Sue Swift, a Morris dancer from London, told me how she believes many people still think of Morris dancing when they think of Englishness, and she hopes it might make an appearance in the Olympic opening ceremony.
It might still happen because we haven't seen the opening ceremony yet, and they do seem to be having a little bit of a portrayal of the English countryside. And I think in people's minds, when one thinks of a village green, one automatically thinks of the local village fete and Morris dances. So it would just fit in.
Details about the first scene of the Olympic opening ceremony have already been revealed. It'll be called Green and Pleasant, and director of the show, Danny Boyle, said it'll represent a traditional and idyllic view of the British countryside. There'll be meadows, fields and rivers, real farmyard animals, families taking picnics and a game of cricket. After the precision and coordination of Beijing's opening ceremony in 2008, it all seems a bit sedate. Boyle has even said that he wants to create an inclusive atmosphere rather than a show, and I think that's rather British in itself. Here's what Julian from the Steadfast Trust thinks about it all.
It's quite iconic throughout the world, the greenery of the English countryside, but I hope it's not just that, a couple of hens and a few pigs. We've got a lot to shout about. Great inventions, English common law, the language which is spoken everywhere, the sports we've invented, football, one of the greatest cultural phenomena that there's ever been, the medical breakthroughs. It can go on and on, but, I'd hope that all those are reflected.
So it's expected that 1 billion people will tune in to watch the 3-hour opening ceremony tonight. But are we any closer to understanding the culture and society that will be represented in it? If I was to distill the essence of Englishness from the things I've heard, I'd have to say that one recurring theme is that of community. And we don't like the idea of being told what to do, and we don't like excluding people either, so we'll work together towards a consensus that suits everyone. I think our tolerance and a quest for plurality have helped make us one of the world's most multicultural societies, and one which has taken significant steps forward in legislation, technology, and entertainment. To finish, here's another extract from that George Orwell essay I mentioned at the start. I think it sums things up well. When you come back to England from any foreign country, you have immediately the sensation of breathing a different air. Even in the first few minutes, dozens of small things conspire to give you this feeling. The beer is bitterer, the coins are heavier, the grass is greener, the advertisements are more blatant. The crowds in the big towns with their mild knobby faces, their bad teeth and gentle manners are different from a European crowd. Then the vastness of England swallows you up, and you lose for a while your feeling that the whole nation has a single identifiable character.